Hello, how's everyone doing? So I got an awesome comment on YouTube asking if we could do a tutorial video where we look at installs and we look at the percentage of those installs that return the first week after install, the first month after install, and the first year after install. So if you look at the chart behind me, we are looking at the volume or count of installs in the blue. And then we're looking at the percentage of those installs that return the first week of install, the first month or first 30 days of install, and the first year after install as well. So let's head over to MySQL and I'll show you exactly how to do this technically. Okay, so here we are in MySQL, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the fact player logins table. So this is just a table of customers and their logins per day. So I'll show you what this looks like. And as you can see, for each unique customer, we have their distinct login dates. So the first thing we're going to do that's super important is we have to identify the maximum date or login date value in this table. So what we're going to do is take the customer ID, the login date, then we're going to do max login date over and then nothing. And this is going to be the date that our data is through. So this is super important when you're calculating retention, because if someone installed yesterday, we don't know, we don't have a leading 365 days or even a leading 30 days to calculate their retention. So we've got to be very careful with that and make sure that we have a fully baked 365 days, 30 days, and 1 week from the player's install date. So what this is going to do is for each customer and their login date, it's going to imprint the max login date value found throughout the table. Okay, cool. So as you can see in this table, the data is through June 29th, 2025. So that's pretty good. Today's date is July 1st, 2025. So the data is relatively up to date. Okay, wonderful. So let's go ahead and put this in a subselect. We can call it customers. And then just right above that subselect, we are going to add more logic. So we'll do customers, customer ID, customers login date. But before that, we're going to put customers and the date our data is through, which is June 29, 2025. So what we're trying to do now is for each customer, we have all of their login dates. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the minimum or first login date and just call this their install date. And then we're going to group it by the customer and the date the data is through, which is June 29, 2025. And let's run a few records. I will show you what this query is shaping up to look like. Okay, and here we are. We've taken all of these records and we've collapsed it to just one record. So we've grouped it up to customer ID, the date the data is through, which is going to be the same value for all of these different customers. And then we did the min on the login date. So we collapsed all of those login dates and grouped them up to customer ID, the date the data is through, and then did a min on all of those login dates and collapse them to return their very first login date, which we were calling their install date. Fantastic. So we have this user ending in 9721, the date that the data is through. So the maximum login date in this table, fact player logins, is June 29, 2025. And their install date was October 15th, 2024. Awesome. So let's take this, we'll put it in another subselect, and we can call this installs. Okay, let's just rename this. We will rename the prefix so that it is referencing the right subselect. And what I mean by that is this is called installs, so these prefixes need to say installs. Okay, awesome. So now we're going to start adding some logic in here, right? Which is, okay, we have customers and we have their install dates and the date that our data is through in this table. So how does this all work together? First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a where clause, and we're going to start filtering the data based on some business logic. So we will say where. What we have to make sure of is, so we want to look at retention the first week, first month, and first year since install, right? So of the three, the largest time horizon is year. And we need to make sure that from the install date that we have at least a leading year of data. So let's put that business logic here in this where clause. We will say where we'll say, let's add 365 days to the install date, and whatever date is returned must be less than or equal to the date that our data is through, right? And that's going to be June 29th, 2025. So we look at the install date of the player, we add 365 days, and it has to be less than or equal to June 29, 2025. And we're doing that because when we check retention 1 year out, we have to have enough data. So if someone installed 2 days ago, we don't have a leading year. So we can't calculate the retention in the first year since installing. All right, great. So let's go ahead and run a few records. Let's make sure we add day in here. And now we can run a few records. Okay, fantastic. So this filtered our data so that we only have install dates that have at least a leading year. So that's great. And of course, that's based off of the date that our data is through, which is June 29, 2025. And the reason why is because to calculate retention, we're going to be joining back to this very same table. So I will show you how to do that now. You can just call this fully baked installs. Yeah. Okay. And let's bring those fields up from the previous subselect. So we have to change our prefix, of course. And within the mobile games industry, it's really common for people to use this terminology when they say, you know, are the installs fully baked, especially when it comes to day 1, day 3, day 7 retention, meaning has 7, 3, 1 full days elapsed since their installation date so that you can calculate retention. So we can bring this stuff in now. And, to be honest, we don't really need this column or field anymore because we already know that these installs have at least a leading year. So we can go ahead and delete this because we don't need it. All right, so here's our data set we're working with. We have customers, we have their install date, we added the business logic to ensure that we have at least a leading year of data to calculate our retention metrics. And now we're ready to go and do that. So all we need to do is to join back to this same table. So this is a self join, but don't be intimidated. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So we're going to return to this same table here. And because we're joining back to this same original table, it's called a self join, but we're doing it as a left join where all the records here will remain the same and preserved. And if there are any matching records based on the join logic, then they will come through. So we will do a left join over here. And we can just call this logins, that's fine. And we'll do it on customer ID, of course, because we want to calculate retention for each unique player. We'll do it on logins.customer ID. And then, of course, we want logins.login date to be at least greater than the install date, right? Because we're calculating retention, and retention calculations typically start at day one retention. So we don't calculate retention for their install date. That's the day they installed. Of course, the day that they installed, they logged in. So retention would always be 100%. So we're looking at, day 1, day 3, day 7, day 30, day 365 retention. So we want to make sure that the login date is for sure and always greater than the install date. So we will do this. And then here's where it gets fun. And we want to make sure that the login date is less than or equal to basically the leading year or 1 year from the install date. So we're just going to swap out this field because the subselect has changed, or meaning we're referencing a different subselect. And we've successfully added this. So what this is saying, hey, we have this data here. Each customer, their install date, go back to fact player logins, and based on the same customer ID, bring back the login dates that are greater than the install date, but that are less than or equal to 365 being added to this install date. So it's saying bring back all the login dates that happened at the very least 1 day after this install date, or at the very most 365 days from this install date. And that puts us in a really good place because it allows us to see, hey, was there a login date that happened the first week since install, the first 30 days or first month since install, and the first year since install? Okay, awesome. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and add some additional case statement logic so that we can put in some retention fields. So we will say this: case when. So when this login date is being returned from the join, and remember the login date has to be a login date that pertains to this specific customer ID, right? Because of this part of the join. And this login date has to be greater than the install date. So what we can do is we can add some business logic and say, case when this install date, right, is less than or equal to we can successfully calculate retention within the first week since install. Because what this is saying is it's saying, hey, we're looking at this specific customer ID. We're bringing across all their login dates that happened the day after install. And we're checking, do we see a login date that happened greater than this install date, which is baked in here, but is less than 7 days added to this install date? And if the answer is yes, if a 1 is returned, then they retained within the first week of installation, meaning they installed and they came back within the first week of installing. So we will do this. And then we can basically do the exact same thing to see if someone returned within the first month after installing. So we will do this, and we will say, we know we're bringing across login dates that are pertaining to this customer ID that are greater than this install date, but let's see if we find any that are greater than this install date, which is good, but less than or equal to 30 days from this install date. And we can call this first month retention. And then I think what's pretty cool about all of this is that this case statement logic is already pre-built in this join right here. So what that means is we're already basically doing this, but we're doing it for the widest of the 3 time horizons, which is year. So all we have to do is something as simple as this. So case when login date, is not null. So if we have a login date that happens, at a minimum 1 day after this install date, at a maximum 365 days after this install date, then we can call them first year retention. So pretty cool, right? Because that's what this logic here essentially ensures. So it's like taking this case statement logic and pre-building it into this join down here. So, okay. So the next thing we need to do is, let's just do a count. And we can call this total installs. And then we can just remove this customer ID. And then we can just take this and we can just add it in a group by down here. And then we can just punctuate all of our work with a nice semicolon there, and then do one final review to make sure I didn't do anything crazy. So we started out with each customer and their install date. We're making sure that we have at least a leading 1 year of data per customer and for each of their install dates. Awesome. Then we're joining back to this logins table on customer ID. We're making sure that the login date is greater than the install date. And that's right, because we don't need to check day 0 retention. And the login date that we're bringing across has to be less than or equal to adding 365 days to the install date. Awesome. And then what we are doing is we're going up to this area up here and we added 3 case statements, So we know that the login dates for each customer are going to be greater than the install date. Great. But we're checking to see do we have a login date that was greater than the install date, but less than or equal to adding 7 days to that install date, 30 days to that install date, and 365 days to that install date. But remember, that logic is actually happening down here. Cool. And then we're doing a count. We're getting total installs. If this does evaluate to true, we get a 1, if not a 0, and I think we're ready. So let me zoom out so that you can see this entire query. And we're going to go ahead and give this a run. So do this. See if I can, and yeah, here we are. So let's run this. Awesome, here is our data. So what I like to do is I like to order by install date, going from earliest to most recent. And we can just go ahead and export this and start building our chart in Excel. All right, so here we are in Excel. We have our install date, and here we have a count or a volume of installs that occurred on each one of these install dates. And then we have the count of these total installs that returned the first week, the first month, and the first year. So let's go ahead and just create some percentage fields. So we can do the percent that returned the first week, returned the first month, and then the percent that first year after install. Cool. So all we need to do is just take first week divided by total installs. For total installs, we want to lock in this column and then just have the rows change, and just move this across knowing that that column is locked in. And we will change this to percentages and check to make sure that these calculations are indeed correct. And then let's just bring this down. Awesome. Cool. Let me beautify this a little bit. We can just call this install date total installs. And then we can just go ahead and select these columns here. And we can select this data, go to insert, create that chart, and we're getting somewhere. So let's go to chart type, we'll go combo. Let's make the total installs just an area chart. And then let's put everything else, the percentages, on a secondary axis. And we're doing pretty good. So we can just call this installs retention first week, first month, first year after install. And let's make some adjustments here on the axis. Just do that. And here you go. This is pretty cool, pretty interesting. So with this demo business, we're getting about, 1,000 installs per day. And you see that 20% of them return within the first week of installing. Something like 45 or 50% return within the first month of installing. And about 95% return within the first year of installing. And if you think about it, it does make sense, right? Because 365 days is a lot of opportunity to return. 30 days is more opportunity than 7 days to return. So that's why these percentages grow as, of course, the time horizon enlarges. So anyway, thank you so much for joining this tutorial. I hope this helps. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.